Pete Hegseth, who's President-elect Trump's pick to head the Department of Defense, will face senators at a confirmation hearing tomorrow, kicking off a week of action on confirmations on Capitol Hill. Senators Roger Wicker of Mississippi and Jack Reed of Rhode Island, the two head lawmakers on the Senate Armed Services Committee, received Hegseth's FBI background check on Friday, two sources tell NBC News. The 25-member committee does not necessarily need to review Hegseth's background check to proceed with the nomination hearing, but two committee sources familiar with the process said it was unprecedented that the report took this long to get to the panel's members. Democrats on the panel have been frustrated by the delay and suggest the report may not be thorough, but they say they'd prefer to see it before Hegseth's hearing tomorrow, regardless. A spokesperson for the FBI declined to comment. Hegseth, a veteran and former Fox News host, has faced multiple controversies and allegations since he was announced as Trump's defense secretary pick. He's met with multiple Republican members of the committee, but his team has told most Democratic senators that he would only be available to meet with them after the hearing. Joining us now is senior investigative producer and story editor for NBC News, Sarah Fitzpatrick. Sarah, let's dig into your latest story because it lays out a lot about, A, what's typical to the background check process, and B, why Democratic senators are frustrated about this. So take them in order. What is actually the norm for this?
So typically, the transition team, the presidential transition team, can ask the FBI to conduct a background check. And it sounds exactly kind of like what we do here. You go back and look through people's finances, talk to their spouses. It's kind of a wide range and typically is a very exhaustive process. Yeah. But the key point here is that the client, the person who orders this background check, is the transition team. It is not Congress. So they can lay out what the parameters are in terms of which witnesses they can speak to, how thorough they want it to be. And I think that's where we're going to see some really potentially explosive conversations on Capitol Hill, because our indications from our reporting is that this background check has not contacted everyone that we would typically expect the FBI to contact.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of reporting in this space, both on the allegations of misuse of funds when Hegseth was at various veterans organizations. There are people who have said to you, I haven't heard from the FBI.
Absolutely. In fact, as of this morning, people who worked closely with Pete Hegseth or have been contacted by Congress about Pete Hegseth's behavior, they have not heard from the FBI. And so it's an indication that, even the very surface level of this has not, those conversations have not taken place. And those are people with really critical and important information about this nominee.
There have also been not just Democratic senators who say, I want to see the background checks, but Republican senators as well. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, they've all said to me in the halls, I want to see this before I make any decisions. How abnormal or normal is it for wide-ranging members of the committee, not just the chairman and the ranking member, to not have seen these background checks?
It is unprecedented. Generally, you would share, it's kind of a standard process. You would be briefed on what's in there. It would be kind of a pro forma thing. In this case, it's being kept very limited just to those two members. And again, they're just receiving a briefing from the Trump transition team. They're not hearing it directly from the FBI. And that's also a key point. It's not required to be. It's the transition team that presents it to Congress. I imagine that it is possible that Democrats could suggest that they would like to hear from the FBI, but I don't know what the process would be or if there's a precedent for that.
And then there's the reality that they're requesting, and there's no real teeth behind the demand to force someone into actually giving that kind of a briefing.
No, not at all. It's really up to what they choose to let those two members of Congress see, not even the full committee.
Then when you think about Democrats, and I have a sense from my sources of where they're going to be going in some of these confirmation hearings, I think the way that one Democratic aide put it to me is they want to sort of begin signposting where the problems and the resumes are for these people so that when mistakes come, if these folks are concerned, which it sounds like many of them likely will be, Democrats are able to turn around and say to the American people, we told you that would happen. What are some of the things specifically with Hegseth that you expect Democrats to bring up during this hearing?
I think one of the major things that we're going to hear about is, of course, his drinking. We reported back in the fall that he was known for being publicly intoxicated at work events to the point that he needed to be carried out. And our reporting indicated that although he has claimed that that is no longer an issue, that he had been that sources had smelled alcohol on him as recently as the fall.
That was at Fox.
So he was at Fox that he had been drinking on the job, but at the veterans organizations as well, and in other kind of professional capacities. So that's going to be a real concern, because for Secretary of Defense, there is no more critical. It is a 24/7 job, and it is a job of judgment constantly. Most Secretaries of Defense never drink alcohol during their term at all. I think more critically, where we're going to see the more explosive things is around allegations of sexual assault. Yeah. There's this very well-documented report of an alleged sexual assault in Monterey, California. There's an exhaustive police report that has been made public. But we have not heard from the accuser or others that would corroborate that. And I think that signposting, that's where we're going to see the potential, because it is such an explosive allegation. And we just have so little information.
Senators on the Hill were also trying to make the point. I think Senator Lindsey Graham was one of them who said, if this allegation is out there, which it certainly is, and that police report is exhaustive, you and I both have read it, Graham is saying they should come forward. They should testify. Do you have any sense that that's something that would happen?
As of right now, we don't have that sense. That has been suggested, but based on the sources that we've been able to contact and get kind of some indications, it doesn't seem like there is a huge list of people that are planning to come forward, if at all. Hegseth attorney told us that he has not heard from the committee that there were plans for any additional witnesses. So I think at this point that looks unlikely, unless there's a big surprise.
And even without that, it's going to be a bruising
Absolutely.
Hearing. One of the senators on the Hill saying they're in for a train wreck this week, which I think is probably the right way to put it.
Absolutely.
Senior investigative producer and story editor for NBC News, Sarah Fitzpatrick, my friend, thank you so much for joining us.
Don't look now, but there is new trouble in MAGA paradise between the two biggest, most powerful, best-funded factions of the actual MAGA political movement. As a student of this movement, I can explain, and there's lots of coverage that plays out how the initial spark, the thing that brought this into public, was a disagreement over the issue of work permits called H-1B visas. They allow companies in the United States to hire foreign-born talent for specialized roles on a short-term basis. Steve Bannon's side and coalition is in one corner. Elon Musk's is pitted against them on the other side. It's a feud that boiled over on social media, one that escalated again over the weekend in the pages of none other than an Italian newspaper, of course. Steve Bannon attacking Elon Musk, suggesting this, quote, he will not have full access to the White House. He will be like any other person. Quote, he is a truly evil guy. This is Bannon saying this about Elon Musk. Quote, a very bad guy. I made it my personal thing to take this guy down, end quote. Musk also said, Steve Bannon also said about Musk that he should, quote, go back to South Africa. Quote, why do we have South Africans, the most racist people on earth, white South Africans? We have them making any comments at all on what goes on in the United States. Musk, for his part, has not responded to these comments publicly. Joining our conversation, someone who is oddly expert at all this, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller, former RNC spokesman, now host of the Tremendous Bulwark podcast. Eddie's still here. So, Tim Miller, first, take me inside why Steve Bannon hates Elon Musk so much, and then talk a little bit about Musk's efforts to retaliate and take some of Bannon's allies off of the platform Musk runs, X.
Yeah, some of this goes back a long way. These guys were going at each other, I think, back in 2018. I think the interesting thing about this, Nicole, because you have to be judicious in discussing the MAGA infighting, because these are a lot of children and, having a food fight in a cafeteria at some level. And, Bannon's mad at so-and-so and so-and-so's mad at Bannon. It's kind of like, who cares at some point? But this one actually does matter, because it is a fundamental rupture in the coalition. Like, for the coalition to survive, they need the nationalist Steve Bannon wing, which is, I would call OG MAGA, the anti-immigrant, anti-trade, America first, if you will. That's sort of the Bannon lane. And then you have Musk, who is really a globalist at his core, but has kind of brought in these tech bros that were, radicalized by COVID or whatever. They might be quote unquote anti-woke, but they're not like meaningfully MAGA across all these policy issues. And Musk, in his case in particular, does business in China. and is on the take from China, which again is fundamentally at odds with kind of the America First crowd that does not believe that the U.S. should be doing friendly business with China, doing friendly business with the world, that we should be decoupling from China. So here we have this fundamental fissure with kind of the Musk world, and now he's got Vivek with him and some other people, and Bannon, and they are going to, this fight is not just about personalities. Like, as policy gets implemented in the next Trump administration, this will be a you know what, to the wall, all out to the wall fight between the Bannon world that does not want, the kind of corporate oligarchs to have power, and then the corporate oligarchs who do want to wield power over Trump. And it's also one where either side could really win, because while Trump might instinctively be more with the Bannon, he loves the attention of the rich guys. He loves having them around. He loves feeling like he has them at their fingertips. They just mentioned that press conference the other day. Zuckerberg came to see me. Gates came to see me. Bezos came to see me. This is the ego thing for Trump. So he might very well sell out his MAGA base and go with the oligarchs. And I think that could potentially cause him some political problems. So I think it's a very meaningful political feud.
Eddie, let me read you. Actually, let me play you some of what it sounds like, what you're hearing in MAGA world, this fight between Bannon and Musk.
He can't take criticism. One of his weaknesses is that he needs to be loved. He needs the masses to love him. You can tell he's on the stage. He needs that glory. He must have adoration. You can tell that. It lights him up. So then on the platform, when his apparatus turns against him, and particularly people that cheered him saying, hey, we hate what you're doing to this country. We know now that you're lying to us, bald-faced lie. These are not higher skilled people. When they turn, all of a sudden he has to go to what's the Chinese credit score. This is to have a digital ghetto. And to only have raised up what praises him. That is like the little boy's mentality. If I want to be the superhero, I want to put the cape on and kind of skip around.
And it's a lot of words, and I think at the root of it, and I will admit to being a student of the movement, I think it's one of our best sort of tools as a pro-democracy side to really understand what fuels and animates and attracts voters to the MAGA movement. He's calling him a hypocrite. That's the accusation. And what, you think that could stick?
Perhaps. I mean, in some ways, it's an echo of those acolytes around Hitler who called the latecomers Septemberlings. You're really not an ideologue. You're just really transactional. And then on the other side of it, right, the Musks and the Ramaswamis and all this actually reveal the grifting side of Trumpism. Right? And this is a kind of nationalist movement. This is our country. And then there's the other side of it. He's not really a man. He called him a little boy.
Right.
He's not a manly man in some way.
I think there's something in here that's, effeminate too, right? When he's prancing around the stage.
Exactly. And then that line, he's the most racist of all. He's a racist South African. I was like, oh my God, isn't that the irony of all ironies?
I had my brain in it.
Exactly. So you have, again, what we talk, this collision of populist, right-wing populism and the corporatist. And they're all in MAGA world. And the question is, that's not an issue of personality. Those are ideological currents that have been at the heart of this movement from the beginning.
And just quickly, Tim, it matters because if you're going to weaken the movement, if you're going to weaken the lock on voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Ohio, if you're going to reshape an opposition movement, you have to peel off one side or the other. What is Steve Bannon's threat privately if Trump sides with Bezos and Musk and whatnot? I mean, do you have any sense of how far he's willing to take this feud?
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve Bannon's got a business to run too, but I think that he's willing to take it. I think that, look, we've seen this in other elections where people only turn out for Trump. This is part of the reason why. If Bannon and his minions decide they're not going to turn out in the midterms for a party that sells out to Elon Musk or sells out to H-1B immigrants, that could have a meaningful negative impact on MAGA movement. Or on the flip side, if Elon says, I'm tired of taking this BS, I'm going to take my huge megaphone on X and start trashing MAGA Americans as the R slur, as he did recently, that fissure could get people to stay home. And I think that from the Democrat side of things, whether any of these people are gettable, I think maybe so. This might be a really hard to hear, triggering thing for some Democrats, but maybe there's just like one shred of a lesson from Bannon's anti-Musk message, right? Maybe the Democrats could kind of pick up this populist mantle of going after the big tech oligarchs, saying they don't actually care about your interests, they only care about themselves. Like, there might be a little bit of a potential shared message there that could be resonant for the Democrats. So I don't, at this point, it's kind of like, you could see it going either way as far as which side might be hemorrhaging people that might be gettable for Democrats, but it's certainly something that's going to be that they're going to need to monitor.
Yeah, and it's not even about turning them into, I mean, in some ways it's so far away from what is viewed as sort of civil and small d democratic, but it is about animation. And if you depress any, Trump won by, 237,000 votes across 7 states. I mean, every event, every fissure, to use your word, Tim, matters. And this one feels like a big one that isn't going away anytime soon.
Elise, some of Trump's more controversial cabinet picks have tried to walk back some of their more controversial positions. Hegseth's an example. He previously opposed women serving in combat roles, said that very publicly. Well, now he's saying he supports it. Tulsi Gabbard flip-flopping on FISA, key intel gathering tool. RFK Jr. describing himself as pro-choice on abortion, but now saying, at least to Republicans, that he'll implement Trump's anti-abortion policies. How do senators know what these nominees actually believe and what they should trust?
That's what they're going to have to suss out at these hearings this week and judge the authenticity and how they answer. And if you look at those issues where these nominees have shifted their positions, with the exception of RFK saying that he's pro-vaccine, they really are flipping on key issues that these committees are going to care about.
Is that typical?
You see walk back of statements, but in the case of Pete Hegseth, he has so much literature and so much airtime with really just out there views anti-women in the military. And so that is something that he really is going to have to overcompensate for and convince the senators that he actually is okay with serving as defense secretary for all men and women who serve under him. Women actually were the only reason that the Army made the recruiting shortfall last year. They finally made their goal because more women are enlisting. So Pete Hegseth has to show that he's going to be supportive.
And we know Senator Joni Ernst is one to watch related to that part of his confirmation process. Brendan, for weeks, the question has been whether Hegseth can get the vote. Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso dodged the question this week. Watch.
Senator, you are the whip. You count the votes. Does Pete Hegseth, the pick to run the Pentagon, have them?
Well, he certainly has the qualities that we need to lead the Pentagon. He knows about a fit fighting force. He is very qualified, in my opinion. He has a distinguished record of service in the military. Every senator gets to speak for themselves, and they will do that. The meetings have gone very well. Things are heading in the right direction.
Brendan, what's your read, and how much do you think it comes down to what happens during the confirmation hearing? Because obviously there's a lot out there that's been dug up through reporting leading up to this moment.
Yeah, I would say hearings don't often matter a ton, but this one very well may. As we've talked about, there are a lot of issues that Pete Hegseth is going to have to answer for, but there is one key senator on that panel who he has not yet won over, and that's Joni Ernst of Iowa, a veteran herself, a survivor of sexual assault herself. And so she's had some real questions about him. And we saw early on in this process, she wasn't ready to get on board with him. She basically said at some point, I'm happy to allow this process to continue. And now we are at the key moment. If he does not perform well in this hearing and she somehow can't get there, then I would think that would spell a lot of trouble for him. I do want to say it is a very good sign for him he has made it this far. It felt a month ago like he was 24 hours away from dropping out. And the fact that he's weathered that storm, I think, should tell you that he's in a decent spot. But he has a lot to answer for. I do think we should also pay attention to the substantive questions he's going to have to answer for in terms of national security and defense policy. A lot of focus, of course, on his personal activity and allegations, which he has denied, of course. But I know these senators are going to also want to know his views on the use of military force and our strategies around the world. And if he's not able to provide sufficient answers there, we shouldn't overlook whether or not some of these people step on it on the substance and not just their personal issues.
Speaking of substance, Donald Trump wouldn't rule out military action to take Greenland and the Panama Canal. Elise, will that come up, do you think, during the Hegseth or the Rubio confirmation hearings?
I do not think that GOP senators would rush to highlight that. Maybe it seems like
Democrats will have a chance to ask questions too.
I really think that I think that Brendan made a key point that his views coming out, his policy views, Hegseth and these other nominees. You have Tulsi Gabbard, and is she going to be seen as supportive of intelligence collection and warrantless surveillance after previously voting against it during her time in Congress? So you have these questions of substance that really are going to matter. And if there is just, say, a terrible, terrible moment, one of those just made for TV moments, deal breaker, it could be a deal breaker.
So, Brendan, how do you think Hegseth should answer a question on a hypothetical about Trump ordering military action against an ally?
Well, the safe space for any nominee is to say that you serve the president of the United States, and that the president makes policy like this. I don't know that that's difficult to dance around. Donald Trump hasn't really clearly laid out what he wants to do in some of these places. I think he would say something to the effect of, the American national security is always going to come first, and that is my priority. But the president of the United States makes policy. So that's certainly not going to sink him. But if some senators want to know his views on how we should be using the Navy to combat China, and he just can't formulate a coherent thought on that, that would be problematic. I don't know that Pete Hegseth is really at risk of that. He's certainly written a lot about national security issues, so maybe he has some. But we've heard, for example, that Tulsi Gabbard has failed to impress people in meetings with her knowledge of some of the space that she's potentially going to be running. If these people who are nominated don't actually know the substance of what they're supposed to be running, that's where I think you could run into real trouble.
Joining us now, founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and host of the Independent Americans podcast, Paul Rakoff, not our senior White House correspondent. No. Paul, really good to have you. Okay, Pete Hegseth. For a while, it looked like there was no way he would survive this process, and then things calmed down. We heard Joni Ernst say nicer things about him. It seemed like the road was getting smoother, but then you just heard there John Barrasso, who is the whip, not exactly say that he's got the votes. What is your prediction?
I think train wreck, chaos, mayhem is right for what we're about to go into. Vacation time is definitely over, and here comes the mayhem. I think most people are keeping their powder dry. I think that's what they're doing. They're saying the things that can keep them in good graces with Trump or keeping them kind of off the radar and waiting to see what comes out, not just in the hearings, but in the next 48 hours and what could happen after the hearings. Because it doesn't look like he'll get a vote immediately after the hearings. So we're talking about maybe another week of breaking news, of people who could come out, of whistleblowers, and some talk that the FBI investigation may not be complete, right? Maybe they haven't talked to some folks who do want to talk. So those folks might come forward to the committee. They might come forward to the press. So I think everybody's keeping their powder dry and waiting to see what happens. But expect fireworks. I think Hegseth wants to set the tone for the Trump administration. That's why I think they also want to put him up first. He considers himself a fighter. He's a culture warrior. In my view, he's woefully disqualified for a number of reasons. But he wants to set the tone and set the pace and put the Democrats on the defense.
How important is it to have a Secretary of Defense in place on day one?
Tremendously important on everything from a potential peace deal in the Middle East to the wildfires in California. This is what used to be called the Secretary of War. This is, in my view, the most important member of the cabinet. It should also be the least political member of the cabinet. And I think that's why Hegseth is ultimately facing so much resistance, because he has been so hyper-partisan. He has been extreme in his political views on women, on gays, on many other folks that are going to be adversely affected in the most diverse workforce on the planet. So 2 million people are going to be under his purview. And if he's not in place, we're going to have a gap. And that's going to be, in my view, a national security risk.
If he gets rejected or he gets pulled, how long would it take to do the whole process over with a new nominee?
It depends on who he picks. I mean, if he picks a retired general who could get through quickly, or someone like Joni Ernst that's more moderate, I think it could go quickly. If he picks another Fox News host or someone that's outside the Beltway, I think it could take longer. I think it's important to recognize none of this is normal. We're talking about whether or not he clears an FBI check. That was never an issue for Lloyd Austin, for Bob Gates, for Dick Cheney. And that's the primary concern we've got right now, which cuts to the core of his character, his fitness, and even his stability, whether or not we can trust him not to drink while he's on the job. This is not normal by any means. And I think it's important that we recognize that going into all these nominations.
So what happens if there is no defense secretary in place? Who's in charge of the Pentagon come Monday if there's not somebody confirmed?
The acting, probably. I mean, they'll have an acting secretary in place.
Could Donald Trump elevate an acting that's already been Senate confirmed? Anybody within the ranks?
I think he would have to, right? I mean, I don't know, to be honest with you, technically, but I think he's not going to keep Lloyd Austin. Maybe he would. I think that would be the sensible thing to do in terms of continuity, but he's been so hard on Austin.
What about CQ?
I mean, CQ Brown's been rumored to be gone, too. I think Trump wants to clear them all out. I don't think he's going to waste any time, and he'll go pretty far down the list until he can find someone who's a loyalist and who's reliable and who can start to execute his pretty radical agenda for the country that starts with the Pentagon. I think that's important for everybody to understand. It starts with the Pentagon. VA is also up next tomorrow. Collins is nominated for VA Secretary, which is getting almost no oversight. Think about how we used to talk about how sacred our obligation was to our veterans. Nobody's even vetting this guy, and it looks like he's going to go through with a check mark. So there's a lot of flooding the zone happening right now, and I think it's a test of the press. It's definitely a test of the Democrats, and, of course, a test of any reasonable Republicans, too.
So tomorrow morning, the confirmation hearings begin, including the Senate Armed Services Committee's confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth, who is, of course, Donald Trump's pick to lead the Department of Defense. And buckle up, everyone. It is sure to be one of the most contentious of all the confirmation hearings for Trump's choices for his new administration. I mean, just consider some of the things we already know about Hegseth just from excellent public reporting. We know about his alleged sexual assault of a woman at a Republican conference in 2017, where a woman told police Hegseth took her phone and blocked her from leaving his hotel room. Hegseth paid the woman an undisclosed sum as part of a settlement. He says the incident was consensual and no charges were filed. Then there was a bombshell report from Jane Mayer in The New Yorker about Hegseth's managerial record and reported alcohol abuse. As Mayer detailed in her piece, a trail of documents corroborated by the accounts of former colleagues indicates that Hegseth was forced to step down by both of the two nonprofit advocacy groups that he ran, Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America, in the face of serious allegations of financial management, sexual impropriety, and personal misconduct. Mayer also reported that a previously undisclosed whistleblower report on Hegseth's tenure as the president of Concerned Veterans for America has described him as being repeatedly intoxicated while acting in his official capacity, to the point of needing to be carried out of the organization's events. She also reported about his inability to manage these relatively small organizations. As the head of the nonprofit group Veterans for Freedom, Mayer reported that Hegseth racked up over $430,000 in unpaid bills, in addition to as much as $75,000 in credit card debts. And yet, NBC News reports that as of Friday, key leaders who worked at both of those veterans organizations had not been contacted by the FBI as a part of Hegseth's background check. And just in the last couple of hours, 3 sources confirmed to NBC that Hegseth's FBI background check also does not include interviews with his ex-wives or with the woman who accused him of sexual assault in 2017. To state the obvious, that does not sound like a particularly thorough background check for the person who is going to lead the Defense Department potentially. Joining me now is the author of that barn burner of a story, Jane Mayer. She is the award-winning chief Washington correspondent for The New Yorker. Jane, it's great to see you. I read your piece again today. It is the best prep for preparing to cover and watch these hearings. And I wanted to just ask you about some of this reporting because you've gone more in depth, it seems, than perhaps the FBI. So one of the leaders of the Senate Armed Services Committee received an FBI background check on Hegseth late Friday. But as recently as that afternoon, former key leaders of the 2 veterans organizations you talk about in your piece that Hegseth ran said they had not been contacted by the FBI for the checks. I mean, you obviously covered him extensively, but you've covered confirmation hearings extensively and national security officials extensively. Does that surprise you? And what could they have learned if they'd contacted them?
Well, thanks so much. Yes, I can confirm what your reporting is too, which is that the FBI, it appears in its background check, skipped most of the key sources that might have really shed light on Pete Hegseth's background. You have to, has this happened before? It has happened. I think anybody who watched the Kavanaugh hearings will remember there was sort of a similar situation there. And in both cases, the FBI has decided for these background checks to regard the administration, that is the Trump administration in both cases, the incoming one now, as the client. And the transitions for Trump basically directed the background investigation. And so I guess, is it surprising? I mean, basically, it seems that they've done something of a whitewash, and the senators will not be able to hear from a number of key sources.
So let me ask you a little bit more about that, because you're an excellent reporter. Thank you for confirming this reporting. It sounds like the veterans organizations. I was also going to ask you about what I just mentioned about that NBC News is reporting tonight, that Hegseth's background check also does not include interviews with his ex-wives or with the women who accused him of sexual assault in 2017. Do you know from your reporting if the FBI has contacted them or reached out to them at all?
We have a forthcoming story on this. I hope it'll be out very soon. But we have much the same information that the woman who filed a rape claim against Pete Hegseth was not, as far as I've been able to determine, even interviewed by the FBI. Not only that, but many of these, I mean, set aside the FBI report, many of these potential witnesses reached out to try, through intermediaries, to try to speak to Republican senators whose votes are the most crucial here, because the Democrats are likely to vote against Hegseth, but they tried to reach out to some of the Republican senators, and the Republican senators have declined to meet with several of these key sources themselves. So, were they kept in the dark, or did they want to be in the dark? You have to wonder.
That is pretty significant. I just want to pause on what you just said for a moment. We'll all be watching for your story, but these women tell you a lot about the character of a person who is about to potentially serve as the Secretary of Defense. I think maybe we'll learn more from your reporting if they were contacted, if they were willing. We'll all wait for it. Let me ask you something else. There has been a huge push by Trump and his allies to, of course, get Hegseth confirmed. This was a bit of a turnaround after Senator Ernst gave what wasn't a satisfactory answer to them in an answer to a question in the hallway. The New York Times is reporting that conservative organizations are targeting Republican senators, saying that they will pay a price if they do not back the president-elect's choice for defense secretary. And we've seen a range of reporting on this. You've covered a lot of nomination processes. Have you ever seen this aggressive and kind of threatening of a push by an administration?
I mean, I think it's unprecedented in hardball playing for a cabinet nominee. I mean, the closest that we've seen to anything like this are in the most contentious Supreme Court nomination fights. But I've never seen anything like this for just a member of the cabinet. But then again, I've also never seen a nominee for Secretary of Defense that has a history anything like Pete Hegseth's. So it's an incredibly abnormal situation, and the amount of money and the intensity of the threats and intimidation that are being brought down on anyone who might stand in the way of his confirmation is really not like anything. I think it's unparalleled for a cabinet confirmation fight.